Hi everyone and welcome to another painting tutorial. So today I'm going to show you how I painted the Magma sword that you might have seen on my Terminator Sergeant. So as you can see, I've already base coated the MEPHISTON red, and I'm just going to begin stippling on some clear orange by VALLEJO. Just to mention as well, it doesn't really matter what undercoat you use. I did use Mechanicus standard grey, however any undercoat will do just fine. Just make sure you do a few clean layers of MEPHISTON red. And as per usual in my more recent tutorials, I'm just using my RHINOX 8404 size 3 zero brush for this. And as you can see, just gradually building up that orange. And of course, you can just work one side, and whilst you're working the orange onto the other side, you can then go back and begin adding a little bit more of the clear orange. And now moving on to bright orange, again by VALLEJO. I was considering using just my Citadel oranges for this, however, I have had these VALLEJO oranges sitting there for a little while, so I thought I would just try them out. And I don't really have a great deal of experience painting magma blades, but I thought with the Sergeant it was a really good opportunity, as I felt as though the red would contrast really well. That sort of red-orange would contrast really well with the blue scheme of the Ultramarines. And as you can see as well with the bright orange, I'm not working that over the entirety of the clear orange, just sort of doing it in quartered sections. And next up, I'm just going to use Buff, again by VALLEJO, and really just using a small amount of this, and again just keeping with the stippling motion, and just working over the bright orange. And as you can see, of course, there is quite a stark contrast between the buff and the bright orange, but once we move on to these next steps, it'll start to blend together a little bit more. And now just moving on to YRIEL Yellow by Citadel, and really just following over that buff. So as you can see, it's just allowing for a little bit more vibrancy. And essentially just working over most of the buff and just leaving a little bit of it in the center, just to sort of give it that white hot heat sort of appearance. Next up, I'm just going to work the darkened burnt edges with DOOMBULL brown. So just using the side of my brush, just working around the edges of the power sword, and of course through the center. Now you can apply this relatively thick. It'll be more so when we move on to the darker tones that will start to limit how much we do. And then quickly moving on to RHINOX, and again really just following over the DOOMBULL brown, however just allowing a little bit of that DOOMBULL brown to remain visible. So as you can see, just using more so the tip of my brush and working that through the center of the blade, and then also the edges as well. And also just adding some small dot marks with the RHINOX hide. And really just try and place these randomly. Make sure that the RHINOX hide is relatively watered down as well, as you don't want this to be too thick. Just try and make the effect as subtle as possible. And now to darken that even further, I'm going to move on to CORVUS Black. This has more recently become one of my favourite colours. It's just a really wonderful sort of smoky grey black. It's really subtle, but it's a really wonderful colour. And now just going back to my bright orange. And just going to help blend in all of the other colours. As I find with the Magma style blades, at least based off of what I've seen, again I really don't have a great deal of practice painting this style of sword, but from what I've seen a lot of the time they do have that sort of orange sort of feel to them. I just think, you know, the general consensus is that that is the colour that does really make the sword sort of pop. And really just take your time with this step. You can add as little or as much as you want, really, it's up to you, depending on how much orange you do want in the sword. For me, I didn't really want it to overlap too much of the colours that we've used, but just to sort of help tie it all together. And now just going back to YRIEL yellow and just working the bottom of the blade there, just to add a little bit of sort of glow around the power node. And just on the power node itself, just a little bit of ice yellow by VALLEJO. And also just a little bit of the ice yellow, just essentially over where we place the buff. So really use this quite sparingly. And as a final touch for the darkened areas, I'm just going to use some ABADDON black. So just working that through the center of the blade, as you can see. Again, not a lot of paint on the brush, and also just using the tip of the brush and just being relatively careful there. And you can also just add a few more of those dot marks like we did with the RHINOX hide, and also some very fine scratches as well. I would recommend though not overloading this effect, as you definitely want to keep a lot of those vibrant colors there. So treat it as a sort of less is more with this sort of style. But after, you know, give it a little bit of time, and if you decide when you come back to it that you want to add more, you can certainly do so. And as a final touch, just to help blend everything together, I decided to do a single coat of MAGMADROTH Flame and Contrast Medium 50/50. Don't worry about adding any water to this mix, but just try and do just one thin layer of this. Just make sure it's nice and even. If it begins to pool at all, just quickly wash the paint off your brush, and you can then just use the brush once you've dried it on a little bit of paper towel and remove any excess paint. And here are some photos of the completed miniature. So I hope you found this tutorial useful today. If you did, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, leave a like and a comment below of something that you might like to see me do in the near future. And if you're in Australia and you're after some heavily discounted miniatures, paints, brushes, all that good stuff, head on over to Gap Games. The link is in the description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again in the next one.